The rain in Wyoming during April has a way of getting into your bones and staying there. It is a cold, gray drizzle that turns the dirt into a thick paste and makes an old man's knees ache with every step. I stood there, under a black umbrella that had seen better days, watching them lower Hank Vance into the ground. Hank and I had spent 30 years in a patrol car together. We had seen the worst parts of this county. We had shared bad coffee, stale donuts, and secrets that most men take to the grave. We were supposed to be retired, sitting on a porch somewhere, arguing about trout fishing or the best way to fix a leaky carburetor. But instead, I was standing over a hole in the dirt, feeling the wind bite through my coat. The preacher was saying something about service and sacrifice. He talked about the big day back in 1996. The day Hank and I became heroes. That was the year of the first national bank robbery. It was a messy affair, high stakes, and we were the ones who stopped the suspects on a back road near the state line. We got the commendations. We got the front page of the paper. We got the town's respect. Looking back, that day was the foundation of everything I believed about myself. But as I looked at the small crowd, something felt off. There was a heaviness that had nothing to do with the weather. Sarah Vance, Hank's granddaughter, was standing a few feet away. I have known Sarah since she was in diapers. She is 26 now, a smart girl, a writer who moved away but came back when Hank's lungs started to fail him. She did not cry during the service. She just watched me. Her eyes were sharp, searching my face as if she expected me to fall apart. When the service ended and the crowd began to drift toward their trucks, Sarah approached me. She looked tired. She was wearing a heavy flannel shirt under a denim jacket, her hair pulled back and damp from the rain. She did not say hello. She did not offer a polite word about the sermon. She just leaned in close, her voice a low whisper that barely carried over the wind. "Jim," she said, "I found something in his nightstand. Behind the old Bible." I nodded, thinking it was probably just a stash of cigars or some old letters. Hank always had a few things he kept from the nurses at the home. "It is okay, Sarah," I told her. He was an old man. He was entitled to his secrets. She shook her head. Her hand came out of her pocket, and she pressed something small and hard into my palm. It was an old silver USB drive. It looked like it had been kicked around a workshop for a decade. "He left a note with it," she said. "The note only had your name on it, and one word. Truth." I looked down at the drive. The metal was cold against my skin. Sarah looked like she wanted to say more, but she just tightened her grip on her jacket. "He was scared, Jim. Those last few nights in the hospital, he was not just sick. He was terrified. He kept talking about that day in 1996. He kept saying he could not go to meet his maker with a lie on his soul." I felt a strange chill that had nothing to do with the Wyoming wind. I tried to maintain my composure. I am a retired deputy. I am the man people go to when things get complicated. I am the man who knows the answers. "Go home, Sarah," I said. "Get some dry clothes on. I will take a look at this." I walked back to my old Ford pickup, the mud sucking at my boots. I did not go to the wake at the church hall. I did not go to the diner for a sympathy burger. I drove straight back to my cabin on the edge of the woods. The house was quiet. My wife, Martha, was at the school finishing up some paperwork. She is a retired teacher, but she still helps out with the library. I was glad to be alone. I sat down at the small desk in the corner of the living room, the one where I keep the bills and the truck manuals. My hands were shaking just a little bit. I told myself it was the cold. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The fan started to whir, a lonely sound in the empty house. A folder popped up. It was encrypted. It took me 3 tries to guess the password. It was our old radio call sign from 1990. A video file appeared. The thumbnail was grainy, showing a close-up of Hank's face. He looked 20 years older than the last time I had seen him. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and red. I clicked play. The video started with the sound of a heavy cough. Hank was sitting in a chair, probably in the basement of his house. The lighting was poor, just a single lamp casting long shadows behind him. He looked directly into the camera. There was no greeting, no reminiscing about the old days. "Jim," he said. His voice was a raspy ghost of the man I knew. "If you are watching this, I am gone, and I am sorry. I am so sorry for leaving you with this." He took a shaky breath. He looked like he was about to break. He looked like a man who had been carrying a mountain on his back for 30 years. "We told everyone we were the good guys, Jim. We took the medals, we took the praise. But we were wrong. We were so wrong." Hank leaned closer to the lens. A single tear ran down the deep creases of his cheek. He looked like he was looking right through the screen and into my soul. "Jim," he whispered. "Those men on the road back in 1996. The ones we reported as armed and dangerous. They were not what we said they were. We killed them for nothing, Jim. We killed the wrong men." I sat in my truck for a long time after the video cut to black. The engine was ticking as it cooled down, a steady metallic sound that felt like a countdown. Outside, the Wyoming wind was shaking the pine trees, but inside the cab, the air felt thick enough to choke on. "We killed the wrong men." That was what Hank said. His eyes, those watery, dying eyes, were all I could see in the reflection of the windshield. I have known Hank Vance since 1974. We started on the force the same week. We bought our first houses on the same street. When my first wife left me, Hank was the one who showed up with a case of beer and a hammer to help me fix the roof I had been neglecting. We were more than partners. We were the story this town told itself about what it meant to be decent. And that day in 1996, that bank robbery, was the moment we became untouchable. I looked at the silver USB drive sticking out of my laptop. It looked so small. It was just a bit of plastic and metal, but it felt like a grenade. If Hank was telling the truth, then every handshake I had received for 30 years, every free coffee at the diner, every bit of respect I carried in this valley was a lie. I thought about Martha. She married me 5 years ago, long after the hero stories had settled into local history. She loves the man she thinks I am, a man of honor, a man who protected this town. I could not just sit there. I needed to know if the recording was real. Hank was on a lot of morphine at the end. Maybe his mind was playing tricks. Maybe the guilt of things we actually did do. The small corners we cut, the minor lies we told, had grown into something monstrous in his head. I needed a professional. I needed Paul Russo. Paul lives about 10 miles out of town in a house that looks like a radio tower exploded. He was a forensic tech back in the day, a man who could find a fingerprint on a grease fire. We have been drinking buddies since the 80s. He is a cynical old soul, always complaining about his back and the state of the government, but he is the only man I trust with something that could burn a hole through my life. I drove over there as the sun was dipping behind the mountains. The sky was the color of a bruised plum. When I pulled into his gravel driveway, Paul was out on his porch, tossing a tennis ball for a dog that was too old to jump for it. "Jim," he said, squinting at me, "you look like you just saw a ghost, or ran over one." I did not smile. I just held up the drive. "I need you to look at something, Paul. In the basement, away from the windows." Paul did not ask questions. That is why we are friends. He saw the look in my eyes and just nodded toward the door. We went down into his workshop. It smelled like solder, old paper, and stale coffee. It is a room full of screens and wires, a place where secrets go to be disassembled. He plugged the drive into a machine that looked like it cost more than my truck. He did not watch the video at first. He ran it through a series of programs, cleaning up the audio, stripping away the hiss of the hospital room or wherever Hank had recorded it. "This is encrypted with an old department code," Paul muttered, his fingers dancing over the keys. Hank always was a stickler for the rules, even when he was breaking them. I sat on a wooden stool, my hands resting on my knees. I felt like a kid waiting in the principal's office. I told Paul about the funeral. I told him about Sarah. I did not tell him what Hank said on the tape. I wanted him to hear it for himself, without my bias. "Okay," Paul said after about 20 minutes, "I have got a clean track. I have isolated the background noise. Whoever recorded this had a high-end microphone, but the room was noisy." He hit a button. Hank's voice filled the basement. It sounded even more hollow through Paul's studio speakers. "We killed the wrong men." The words hit the floor like lead weights. Paul froze. He looked at me, then back at the screen. He did not say a word. He just kept working the dials. "Wait," Paul whispered. "Listen to the background." Right after he says 1996, he looped a 3-second clip and cranked the volume. At first, it was just a low hum. But then, as Paul filtered out the frequencies, a sharp, metallic chirp came through. Then a voice. It was faint, crackly, like a distant memory. "Dispatch, this is Unit 1. We have the targets in sight. Proceeding with the plan." I felt the blood drain out of my face. Unit 1. That was not me and Hank. We were Unit 4 back then. Unit 1 was the supervisor's car. Unit 1 was Bill Sterling. Bill was our sergeant back then. He was the one who gave us the coordinates. He was the one who told us the suspects were firing on us before we even got out of the car. Now, he is the mayor. He is the man who gave the eulogy at Hank's funeral today. He is the man who stood by me when I lost my house in the divorce. He is the man I have called my best friend for 40 years. Paul leaned back in his chair. His face was pale under the blue light of the monitors. "Jim, that background audio. That is an old police band recording. It is playing in the room where Hank was filming." Hank was listening to the old tapes while he was talking. He hit another button, bringing up a waveform on the screen. He pointed to a spike in the audio. "And here," Paul said, his voice trembling. "Listen to this voice. It is muffled, but the cadence is unmistakable." A new voice came through the speakers. It was not Hank. It was a man shouting in the distance, barely audible behind the hiss. Something about the money and the accountant. I knew that voice. I had heard it every week for decades at our Saturday morning breakfast. It was Bill Sterling. But he sounded different. He sounded cold. He sounded like a man giving an order to a firing squad. Paul shut the monitor off. The silence in the basement was worse than the noise. He turned his chair to face me. He looked older than he had 20 minutes ago. Jim, if this is what I think it is, we are in a lot of trouble. This is not just a dying man's regret. This is evidence. That bank robbery, the one that made us, it was not a robbery. It was a hit, and we were the ones who pulled the triggers for him. I shook my head. No, Bill would not do that. He was there with us. He took the same risks, did he? Paul asked. Think back, Jim. Really think. Who saw the guns first? Who told you the suspects were reaching? It was always Bill on the radio. You and Hank were just the muscle. You were the two honest guys he could use to make a murder look like a shootout. I thought about the money. $500,000 was missing from the vault that day. We were told the suspects had ditched it in the river during the chase. We spent 3 weeks diving in that freezing water, looking for bags that never showed up. We thought we were just unlucky. Paul stood up and walked over to a small safe in the corner of the room. He pulled out a bottle of rye and 2 glasses. He poured them full and handed one to me. Jim, listen to me, he said, his voice deadly serious. You can't go to the station with this. You can't go to the DA. Bill owns this county. He has been building his kingdom on that lie for 30 years. I took a long swallow of the rye. It burned all the way down, but it did not help the cold feeling in my chest. What am I supposed to do, Paul? I am 71 years old. I just want to fix my truck and sit with my wife. Paul leaned in, his eyes hard. If this tape gets out, Jim, it does not matter that you did not know. The headlines will not care about your intent. They will call you a killer. They will take your pension. They will take your house. They will turn your name into a curse. He pointed to the USB drive. We are the only ones left who know the truth. Hank is gone. Bill is the king of this valley. If you keep digging, you are not just looking for justice. You are looking for a way to destroy everything we ever built. I looked at my hands. They were the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime trying to do the right thing. But now, I realized those hands might be stained with something that no amount of time could wash off. I took the drive from the computer and put it in my pocket. I did not say goodbye. I just walked out into the night. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror at Paul's house. He was standing in the doorway, a small figure against the light. He looked like he was watching a ship sink. I knew what I had to do next. I had to talk to the one man who had never lied to me. Or at least, the man I thought had never lied to me. I needed to see Bill Sterling. Not as a friend. Not as a mayor. I needed to look him in the eye and see if I could find the man from 1996. The road ahead was dark, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I did not know the way home. I was not just a retired deputy anymore. I was a man with a secret that could burn the whole world down. And the worst part was, I was starting to think that maybe it deserved to burn. The drive home from Paul's house was the longest 10 miles of my life. The dashboard lights of my Ford flickered, casting a pale green glow over my hands. Those hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was a storm. Paul's words kept echoing in the small space of the cab. This was not just a robbery. It was a hit. And Bill Sterling, the man I had called my brother for 40 years, was the man who pulled the strings. I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation. Bill had been the best man at my wedding. When the bank robbery happened back in 1996, he was the one who walked us through the aftermath. He made sure our reports were tight. He made sure the town saw us as the shield that kept them safe. But now, that shield felt like it was made of glass. And it was cracking right down the middle. The next morning, the sun came up cold and bright over the mountains. I didn't sleep much. I sat in my kitchen drinking black coffee, watching Martha get ready for her day. She noticed I was quiet, but she didn't push. She knows when I'm chewing on something. I watched her drive away to the school library, and then I grabbed my jacket. I needed to see Bill. Not at a bar, not a barbecue. I needed to see him in the mayor's office. The town hall is a red brick building that looks like it belongs on a postcard. It's supposed to represent order and tradition. I walked past the receptionist who had known me since I was a deputy. She gave me a big smile. "Jim, good to see you," she said. "The mayor is busy, but for you, I'm sure he has a minute." I stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the photos on the wall. There was one from 1997. It was Bill, Hank, and me. We were standing in front of the station, wearing our medals. We looked so young, so sure of ourselves. Bill was in the center, his arms around our shoulders. He looked like the king of the world even then. The door opened, and Bill stepped out. He's 72 now, but he still carries himself like a man who owns the air he breathes. He was wearing an expensive wool suit, the kind you don't buy in this county. His white hair was perfectly combed. When he saw me, his face broke into that famous, warm smile. "Jim," he boomed, stepping forward to give my hand a firm squeeze. "I was just thinking about you. That was a tough day yesterday. Hank was a good man, the best of us." I looked into his eyes. They were clear and bright. There was no hint of guilt, no shadow of a secret. It made my stomach turn. I followed him into his office. It was a big room, filled with dark wood and the smell of expensive tobacco. On his desk was a framed photo of our old patrol unit. "Sit down, Jim, sit down. You want some coffee? Or maybe something stronger? I know you're hurting." I sat in the leather chair across from him. "I didn't take the coffee, Bill," I said, my voice sounding rough even to me. "I've been thinking about Hank. About the end. He was real restless those last few days." Bill leaned back in his chair, his hands laced behind his head. "Dying is a messy business, Jim. The mind goes to strange places when the body starts to fail. Hank was always a bit of a worrier. He probably just had some things on his conscience that didn't belong there." "He said he left something for me," I said, watching him closely. "Sarah mentioned he'd been working on some old files. Recordings. From the old days." The room went very still. It was only for a second, but I felt the temperature drop. Bill's smile didn't vanish, but it changed. It became something harder, something professional. "Recordings?" he asked. His tone was casual, but his eyes were locked on mine. "What kind of recordings?" "Hank was never much for technology. Just some old tapes from 1996, I said. He seemed to think there was something we missed. About the bank. About the money that never turned up. Bill laughed, but it was a dry, hollow sound. "Jim, we looked for that money for 3 weeks. The river took it. Everyone knows that. Hank was probably just reliving the glory days. You know how it is. Sometimes we want the story to be bigger than it was." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. He was too close now. I could smell his cologne. It was sweet and cloying. "Did Sarah give you these recordings?" he asked. "Because if there's something in the archives that needs to be handled, it should come through the proper channels. For the sake of the department's reputation. And yours, Jim. You don't want people digging into the past and getting the wrong idea." The way he said my name felt like a threat. It wasn't about the department. It was about the lie. He wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was assessing the damage. "I haven't seen them yet," I lied. "Sarah's still going through his things. I just thought I'd ask if you remembered anything unusual from that call. You were on the radio that day, Unit 1. Bill's eyes thinned. He didn't blink. He knew I was fishing. His hand reached out and touched the photo of us on his desk. His finger traced over Hank's face. "Jim, listen to me. Hank is gone. He's at peace now. Whatever nonsense he was rambling about at the end, it's just the shadows of an old man. You and I, we have a legacy to protect. This town looks up to us. Martha looks up to you. Don't go chasing ghosts just because a grieving girl found some old junk in a nightstand. It's not good for your health." He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. He walked around the desk and put a heavy hand on my shoulder. It felt like a lead weight. "Why don't you take Martha out to dinner tonight? On me. I'll call the steakhouse and set it up. Forget about the tapes, Jim. Let the dead stay dead." I walked out of that office feeling like I'd been slimed. It wasn't just that he was lying, it was the way he did it. He used my wife's name. He used my reputation. He was telling me to stay in my lane or he'd take the road away from me. As I walked through the town hall, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I didn't look back. I got into my truck and started the engine. I needed air. I needed to get away from the brick and the suits and the smell of that office. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the main road. I checked my side mirror. A black SUV, the kind the county uses for official business, pulled out of a side street 2 cars behind me. I made a right turn toward the hardware store. The SUV made a right turn. I made a left toward the outskirts of town, heading for the open road. The SUV stayed there, 2 car lengths back. It didn't try to pass. It didn't turn on its lights. It just sat there, a dark shadow in my wake. I looked at the silver USB drive sitting in my cup holder. Bill hadn't just been cold about Hank's death. He had been terrified of what Hank might have said. And now, he wasn't just my friend anymore. He was a man who was watching me. I realized then that the truth wasn't just about right now. It was about right now. It was about the man I'd spent 40 years trusting, and the fact that he was willing to put a tail on me the second I asked a question. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I wasn't just a retired deputy anymore. I was a target. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if the law was on my side. I looked in the mirror again at the black SUV. It was still there, waiting. I didn't go home. I kept driving, out toward the state line. out where the cell service drops and the mountains grow tall. If Bill wanted to follow me, I'd give him a long trip. But I knew one thing for sure as I watched the town disappear in my dust. I wasn't going to let the dead stay dead. Not until I knew exactly what they were trying to tell me. And if Bill Sterling wanted to protect his legacy, he was going to have to do a lot more than buy me a steak dinner. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror as the buildings of our small town faded into the dust. The black SUV was still there, keeping a steady, haunting distance. Bill Sterling was a man who didn't like loose ends, and apparently, I had become one. I didn't head for home. Home was where Martha was, and right now, Martha was the only thing I had left to protect. I took a sharp turn onto Route 54, heading west toward the state line. I knew these roads better than anyone. I spent 30 years patrolling them. I took a series of back road cuts through the sagebrush, pushing the Ford until the suspension groaned. By the time I hit the gravel wash near the county border, the dust cloud behind me was thick enough to swallow a tank. The black SUV slowed, hesitant to follow me into the rough timber country. I didn't wait to see if they'd find their nerve. I floored it. I was looking for a man named Eddie. Back in 1996, the police reports called him a dangerous accomplice. We called him Silent Eddie because he never said a word during the pursuit, and he vanished into the mountains before the handcuffs could come out. For 30 years, the official story was that Eddie was the one who fired first, the one who turned a routine stop into a bloodbath. Hank's notes on the USB drive had a map. It wasn't a digital map. It was a hand-drawn sketch of a junction near an abandoned mining camp. There was a gas station out there, a place that didn't show up on most GPS units. It was a place for people who wanted to be forgotten. The sun was low and angry when I pulled into the lot. The station was a rusted shell. 2 pumps sat leaning like tombstones under a sagging metal roof. A man was sitting in a plastic chair near the door, scrubbing a hubcap with a rag that looked older than he was. He was thin, with skin like cured leather and white hair that hung in greasy strings. I stepped out of the truck. I didn't reach for my badge. I didn't have one anymore. But I still had the walk. I still had the look of a man who could make your life very difficult. "Eddie," I said. It wasn't a question. The man froze. He didn't look up at first. He just kept scrubbing that hubcap, faster and faster. "I know you," he whispered. "I know that voice. You're the shadow from the highway." I walked closer, stopping when I felt the heat coming off the gravel. "I'm Jim Miller. I was there that night, and I think you and I have a lot to talk about." Eddie finally looked up. His eyes were wide, filled with a raw, ancient kind of fear. He looked like a man who had been expecting a bullet for 3 decades. "Go away, deputy. I don't know anything. I was never there. That's what the deal was." "What deal, Eddie? Who made the deal?" He stood up, his knees popping like dry twigs. He tried to move toward the door of the shack, but I stepped in his way. "I'm 71 years old, Eddie. I've lived my whole life believing I was the hero of that night. But my partner is dead, and he left me a message that says I'm a liar." I leaned in, my face inches from his. "Bill Sterling told us you were the shooter. He told us the men in that car were armed and looking for a fight. Is that how it happened?" Eddie started to laugh, a dry, hacking sound that turned into a cough. "Armed." He spat on the ground. "Those boys didn't have a cap gun between them. We were just couriers, Jim. We were moving paperwork. Records from the old mill that Sterling was using to hide his kickbacks." He shook his head, his hands trembling so hard he had to drop the hubcap. It clattered on the concrete. "We weren't robbing the bank. We were getting the evidence out before the federal auditors arrived the next morning. Sterling told us he'd have a patrol car escort us to the state line for safety. He said it was for our protection." My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold hand. "An escort?" Eddie nodded. "He said you and Hank were the best he had. He said you'd see us through. But when we pulled over, nobody asked for a license. Nobody told us to put our hands up. The radio in our car went off, and then the lead started flying. It wasn't a shootout, deputy. It was an execution." I felt a wave of nausea. I remembered the radio call. Unit 1. Bill's voice, calm and steady, telling us the suspects were reaching for shotguns. Telling us we were cleared to engage. I remembered the flashes in the dark. I remembered thinking I was protecting my partner. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "When they caught you?" Eddie looked at me like I was the simplest man on earth. "They didn't catch me, Jim. Sterling found me 2 days later. He gave me $5,000 and told me if I ever showed my face in that county again, my sister would be the one paying for a funeral. He didn't need to kill me. He just needed me to stay a ghost so the story stayed clean." I sat down on the bumper of my truck. The world felt like it was tilting. My entire life, my reputation, the way people looked at me in the grocery store. It was all built on a slaughterhouse floor. Bill hadn't just used us. He had turned us into his personal hit squad, and he had done it so well that we thanked him for the privilege. The money, I said. The missing $500,000. Eddie shook his head again. There was no money, Jim. Not in the car. That money stayed in Sterling's pocket. He used the robbery as a cover to explain why the bank's books didn't match the vault. He stole the money, killed the men who knew where the records were, and made you the hero for helping him cover the tracks. I looked out at the empty Wyoming horizon. The wind was picking up, whistling through the rusted pumps. I thought about all those years of Saturday breakfasts with Bill. All those times he'd patted me on the back and called me a pillar of the community. He'd been laughing at me the whole time. Eddie reached out and touched the sleeve of my jacket. His fingers felt like claws. You want to know the worst part, Jim? The driver of that car, the one you took down first. I didn't want to know. I knew I didn't want to know. But I couldn't stop him. His name was Miller too, Eddie said, his voice dropping to a jagged crawl. No relation to you. Just a kid from the next county over. He was 22. He had a 3-month-old daughter at home. He wasn't a criminal. He was a clerk who thought he was doing a favor for the mayor. Eddie leaned in closer, his eyes burning into mine. You're the one who pulled the trigger, Jim. You're the one who took that father away from his kid because you believed a man in a suit over the evidence in front of your own eyes. You weren't a hero that night. You were just the tool Bill Sterling used to bury his sins. The silence that followed was heavier than the mountains. I looked at my hands. They looked the same as they had this morning. But they felt heavy. They felt stained. I got back into my truck without a word. Eddie didn't try to stop me. He just sat back down in his plastic chair and picked up his hubcap. He was a ghost again, and I was something much worse. I was a man who had finally seen the truth, and the truth was that I had spent 30 years living a lie that cost a young man his life. I started the engine. The dust was settled now. The road back to town was long, and I knew Bill Sterling was waiting for me. He thought he owned me. He thought he'd bought my silence with 30 years of fake friendship. But as I turned the truck around, I felt a new kind of fire in my chest. It wasn't the heat of a hero. It was the cold, hard steel of a man who had nothing left to lose but his shame. I wasn't just going back to town. I was going back to finish the job I started in 1996. Only this time, I was going after the real criminal. The sun had long since dipped behind the peaks by the time I pulled back into my own driveway. My chest felt like it was full of hot gravel. Eddie's words were a cold weight in my pocket, right next to that silver USB drive. You killed the wrong man, Jim. You were just the tool Bill Sterling used to bury his sins. I sat in the dark cab for a minute, looking at the warm yellow light spilling from my kitchen window. Martha was in there. She was humming a song, probably fixing a plate for me. It was the kind of peace a man works 40 years to earn, and I realized then that every second of it was built on a foundation of bone and lies. I walked inside and tried to keep my face from breaking. Martha looked up from the stove. She smiled, that soft, tired smile that usually makes me feel like the world is okay. She told me I looked like I'd been chasing ghosts all day. Then she mentioned that the young man who had been helping her with the library computer, the one she thought was a volunteer student, had stopped by to drop off some books while I was out. She said he was a nice boy, very helpful, and he'd even spent an hour in the living room fixing the Wi-Fi router. My blood went cold. I've spent my life in law enforcement. You don't fix the Wi-Fi for an hour unless you're planting a bug or mirroring a signal. I waited until Martha went to bed. I sat in my darkened study, not turning on the lamps. I pulled out the old cardboard box Hank had given me years ago, the one he called his sentimental junk. I started digging. I wasn't looking for medals or commendations this time. I was looking for the things we weren't supposed to see. I found a stack of crime scene photos from that night in 1996. These weren't the official ones in the file. These were the ones Hank took on his personal camera before the coroner arrived. I laid them out on the desk. In the background of one shot, barely visible in the tall grass near the suspect's car, was a black duffel bag. It wasn't in the evidence log. I looked at the next photo. Bill Sterling was standing near that bag. He wasn't looking at the bodies. He was looking at the tree line, his foot resting on the bag like he was claiming it. It clicked. The accountant Eddie mentioned, the missing records. Sterling wasn't just covering up a mistake. He had used us to hit the people who were carrying the proof of his original sin. The illegal campaign money he'd been laundering for the mob out of Denver. He didn't just buy his way into the mayor's office. He murdered his way there, and he used my service weapon to do the dirty work. He didn't just lead us. He bought my entire life. Every promotion I got, every bit of respect I had, it was all a payment. He bought my silence before I even knew I had a secret to keep. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean against the wall. This man had sat at my dinner table. He had toasted my marriage to Martha. He had called me the brother he never had. And all the while he was keeping a leash on me, watching me through. Helpful. Volunteers. Making sure the man who pulled the trigger never looked too closely at the man who gave the order. It is a bitter thing to realize your whole life has been a scripted play for someone else's benefit. Sterling didn't just steal a young man's life that night in 1996. He stole mine too. He turned a proud deputy into a blind accomplice and spent 30 years laughing about it behind his expensive mahogany desk. He thinks he's untouchable because he has the badge, the gavel, and the keys to the town. He thinks an old man like me will just roll over to protect what little dignity I have left. But some things are more important than a pension or a clean record. My partner Hank died in a state of terror because of this man. That young clerk's daughter grew up without a father because of this man. And now he's putting his hands near my home. He's sent his people to watch my wife. There is a special kind of anger that comes when you realize the person you trusted most has been the one holding the knife to your back the entire time. I want to take a moment here. I know many of you listening have spent your lives working hard, playing by the rules, and trusting the people in charge. You believe in loyalty. You believe that a man's word is his bond. But imagine finding out that the person you respected most, the leader of your community, has been using you as a shield for his own crimes. If you think a man like Bill Sterling, who uses his power to destroy honest families, is a total coward and deserves to lose everything, just type the word Sammy in the comments right now. I want to see how many of you stand for the truth when the lie is this ugly. I sat there in the dark, the word, shame, echoing in my own head. I knew the mayor wasn't just going to let me sit on this. If he was bugging my house, he knew I was digging. He knew I had seen Eddie. The silence of the house felt heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. I looked at the photo of Sterling one last time. He looked so confident, so safe. Then, the phone on the desk rang. It was late, way too late for a social call. I didn't want to pick it up, but I knew I had to. I answered, Jim. The voice was smooth, like expensive bourbon. It was Bill Sterling. He sounded remarkably calm, almost cheerful. I'm sorry to call so late, old friend. I was just sitting here thinking about our talk earlier. I didn't say a word. I just listened to him breathe. You know, Martha looked so lovely today at the library, Bill continued. I saw her from my car. She has such a kind heart. It's a rare thing in this world, Jim. We have to do everything we can to keep her safe, don't we? To keep her life simple and happy. It would be a tragedy if she had to deal with the kind of stress that comes with old, ugly rumors. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air like a noose. Go to sleep, Jim. We'll talk soon. I've got some big plans for the town's anniversary, and I want you right there by my side, like always. He hung up. I sat there with the dial tone humming in my ear. He wasn't just asking for silence anymore. He was holding my wife's peace of mind as ransom. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the kind of cold, steady rage that only comes when a man has been pushed too far. Bill Sterling thought he owned me. He thought he could threaten the woman I love, and I just tucked my tail. He forgot one thing. He forgot that he's the one who trained me. He's the one who taught me how to hunt. And he has no idea that the man he's been watching is finally looking back. The morning air was cold and smelled like wet iron. I woke up at 4 in the morning to the sound of tires crunching on the gravel outside my cabin. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. I peeked through the blinds and saw 2 cruisers parked across my driveway. They weren't there for a friendly chat. They were there to build a fence around my life. By 8 o'clock, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. It wasn't Bill Sterling this time. It was the bank. A polite woman with a voice like sandpaper told me my personal accounts had been flagged for suspicious activity and were frozen pending an investigation. Then came the knock on the door. It was a young deputy I had trained myself, a kid named Miller, no relation, who couldn't even look me in the eye. He handed me a warrant. He said there had been a complaint filed. Suspected illegal possession of a modified firearm and witness intimidation. They spent 3 hours tearing my house apart. They didn't find the silver drive. I had that tucked into the lining of my boot, but they took my service revolver and my hunting rifles. They were stripping me down, piece by piece, right in front of Martha. She stood in the kitchen, her face as white as a sheet, clutching a dish towel. She didn't ask what was happening. She saw the way those boys were moving through our home. She knew the man in the mayor's office had finally pulled the leash tight. I got a call from Paul Russo's wife an hour later. She was crying. She said someone had broken into Paul's workshop while they were at breakfast. They didn't just steal things, they smashed the monitors. They poured acid over the hard drives. They left a note on the workbench that said, "Mind your own business." Paul was okay, but he was done. He told me through the phone, his voice shaking, that we were playing against a house that owned the cards, the table, and the dealer. I knew I couldn't stay. If I stayed, Martha would be the next target. I told her to go to her sister's place in Casper, and not to tell a soul where she was going. I saw the fear in her eyes, the kind of fear that ruins a marriage, but I couldn't fix it then. I had to move. I picked up Sarah Vance at a diner on the edge of the county. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She had a laptop bag clutched to her chest like a shield. We headed for the high country, toward the old timber trails where the radio signals die and the deputies don't like to scratch their paint. We pulled over at a turnout overlooking the valley. The town looked so small from up there. So peaceful. I turned on the truck's small portable television, the one I use for camping. There was a local news feed. Bill Sterling was standing on a podium in front of the new community center. He was wearing a soft blue sweater, looking every bit the grandfather of the town. He was talking about healing and the importance of trust in our institutions. He even mentioned Hank's name, calling him a hero who stayed true to the end. Next to me, Sarah started to sob. It wasn't a loud cry, it was that jagged, broken sound a person makes when the world stops making sense. My grandfather lived in a nightmare for 30 years because of that man, she whispered. He died thinking he was a monster. And now Bill is using his name to sell a lie. I looked at her, then back at the screen. Bill was smiling, shaking hands with a group of veterans. He looked untouchable. He looked like a man who believed his own story. I've seen a lot of bad men in my time, but the ones who hide behind a smile and a charity check are the hardest to stomach. They don't just break the law. They poison the ground everyone else walks on. If you are listening to this, and you can see the difference between a man's uniform and his character. If you think a mayor who uses his power to hunt down an old man and a grieving girl is a total coward, just comment the word Sammy in the section below. I want to know who is still awake out there. I took a deep breath and turned off the TV. I sat there for a minute, just listening to the wind whistle through the door seals of the truck. I know the feeling of being backed into a corner. I know what it's like when the people you trusted turn the lights out on you. But I also know that men like Bill Sterling are always afraid of one thing. They are afraid of the dark. They are afraid of what happens when the people they've stepped on stop being afraid. I know what he's thinking. He thinks he's won because he took my badge and my bank account. He thinks he's safe because he smashed Paul's computers. But he's wrong. He forgot about the old ways. He forgot that before I was a deputy, and before he was a politician, we were just men in the woods. I put the truck in gear and drove deeper into the pines, toward a spot where the old logging roads end. I stopped the Ford and got out. I walked around to the bed of the truck and pulled back the heavy rubber mat. Tucked into a hidden compartment near the wheel well was a long, olive-drab soft case. I unzipped it. It was a Remington 700, bolt action, with a heavy barrel and a Leopold scope. I hadn't touched it since the late 90s. I felt the cold steel against my palms. It was heavy. It was honest. Bill Sterling spent 30 years building a cage out of paper and lies. He thinks the law belongs to him. But out here, where the air is thin and the shadows are long, there is a different kind of law. It's the kind that doesn't need a mayor's signature. I looked at Sarah. She saw the look in my eyes and didn't say a word. She saw the man I used to be coming back to the surface. I wasn't just a retired deputy anymore. I wasn't a victim, I was a hunter, and the season was finally open. I checked the bolt. It slid home with a clean, metallic click. The decision was made. There was no going back to the house, or the retirement, or the quiet life. I was going to find the man who stole my honor, and I was going to make him give it back. One way or another. I drove the old Ford toward the lumber mill on the north side of town. It is a skeleton of a place now. Nothing but rusted corrugated metal and the smell of rot and old sawdust. It was 10 o'clock at night. The sky was clear, and the stars looked like cold salt scattered over a black cloth. I was not there to hide anymore. I was there to end a story that should have been finished 30 years ago. Bill Sterling was waiting for me. He had parked his shiny black SUV right in the center of the loading bay, his headlights cutting through the dark like two angry eyes. He was leaning against the hood, wearing that expensive wool coat, looking like a man who was just waiting for a late bird flight. He did not look worried. He looked bored. I stepped out of my truck. I left the Remington 700 in the cab. I did not need the rifle for what I had planned. I just had a small, plastic clip pinned to the inside of my collar. Paul Rosso had stayed up all night in a motel room 3 towns over. rigging a satellite link that Bill's jammers could not touch. And Sarah was about 50 yards away, hidden in the shadows of a collapsed drying rack, her finger resting on the transmit button of a high-end camera. "Jim," Bill said, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "You look tired. This has gone on long enough, don't you think? You've been running around like a man possessed, upsetting the peace of this town. It is time to go home." I walked toward him until I was only 10 feet away. The light from his SUV was blinding, but I did not blink. I went to the state line. "Bill." I saw Eddie. Bill's face did not change, but I saw his fingers tighten on the edge of the hood. "Eddie is a drunk and a ghost, Jim. You are going to take the word of a fugitive over mine. Over 30 years of friendship." "I am taking the word of the truth, Bill. I know about the accountant in 1996. I know the robbery was a setup to cover your campaign debts. I know we were not stopping criminals that night. We were cleaning up your mess." Bill laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Even if that were true, who is going to believe you? You are a retired deputy with a frozen bank account and a warrant for your arrest. I am the mayor, I am this town. Everything you have, Jim. Your house, your reputation, the very pension you are so worried about. I gave that to you. I bought your life 30 years ago. You took the medals. You took the praise. You are just as dirty as I am." I felt a cold stone in my stomach, but I kept my voice steady. "You told us they had shotguns, Bill. You told us they were firing. You lied to us on the radio, so we would pull the triggers for you. You turned me into a murderer." Bill stepped toward me, his face twisting into something ugly and raw. The charm was gone. The saintly mayor was buried under the weight of his own greed. "Yes, I lied," he shouted, his voice booming in the empty mill. "I did what I had to do to survive. Those boys were a threat to the future of this town. And you were just a simple-minded cop who wanted to be a hero. So I gave you what you wanted. I gave you the glory, and I took the money. It was a fair trade, Jim. You should be thanking me." He leaned in close, his breath smelling of peppermint and whiskey. "You are going to hand over that USB drive right now, and then you are going to walk away. If you don't, I will make sure Martha spends her golden years visiting you in a state pen. I have the judges. I have the DA. I have every badge in this county. You are nothing, Jim." I looked him dead in the eye. For the first time in 3 decades, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. It was not a fair trade, Bill. I reached up and tapped the small clip on my collar. "Sarah," I said, "did we get all that?" From the shadows, a red light flickered. Sarah stepped out into the beam of the headlights, holding the camera steady. She did not say a word. She did not have to. Bill froze. His eyes went from me to the camera, and then to the small tablet Sarah was holding. On the screen, thousands of comments were scrolling by. The video was being streamed live to every social media page in the state, from the local news to the state police headquarters. The whole world had just heard the mayor of our town admit to a triple murder and 30 years of corruption. "You," Bill stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "You can't do this. That is not legal." "It is the truth, Bill," I said. "And the truth does not need a warrant." At that moment, the sound of sirens began to rise from the valley. It was not just one or two. It was a chorus of them. Blue and red lights began to dance off the trees on the access road. Bill looked at the lights, and then he looked at me. He reached for something inside his coat, but he stopped. He realized there was no one left to call. His allies, the people who had protected him for years, were watching that same video. They were busy burning their own files and packing their bags. I stood there and watched as the state police cruisers roared into the mill yard, kicking up clouds of gray dust. They did not go to my truck. They went straight for the mayor. I saw the handcuffs click around Bill Sterling's wrists. He did not look like a king anymore. He looked like an old, tired man who had finally run out of lies. As they led him away, he looked back at me, his mouth open as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. I leaned against my Ford and watched the lights fade. My heart was beating fast, but the anger was gone. I looked at Sarah. She was shaking, but she was standing tall. She had done it. She had cleared her grandfather's name. I took a deep breath of the cold, wiming air. It felt different. It felt clean. The story was finally over. The positive credit I had built my life on was gone, but for the first time in 30 years, I could look at my hands and know they were finally mine again. The sirens were loud, but the silence inside me was even louder. It was the sound of a man who had finally found his way back to the right side of the law. The dust finally settled on the streets of our little town, but the air felt different. It was lighter, somehow. Bill Sterling was gone, escorted out of the county in the back of a state cruiser. The news reports were full of talk about corruption and old secrets. But I stopped watching the television after the first day. I didn't need a news anchor to tell me what I had lived through for 30 years. I did what I had to do. I drove down to the state capitol and sat in a small, windowless room with two investigators from the Attorney General's office. I told them everything. I didn't hold back. I told them about the night in 1996. I told them how I had pulled the trigger, believing a lie told to me over a radio. I told them that an innocent young man died because I was too proud to second guess a man I called a friend. They stripped me of my retired rank. They took my honorary badge and removed my name from the wall of honor at the station. My pension was put under review, and for a while, it looked like I might lose the house. But as I walked out of that building in the city, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel defeated. For the first time since 1996, the knot in my stomach was gone. I was just Jim Miller, no titles, no medals, just a man. When I got back to town, I expected people to look away. I expected the cold shoulder. I had tarnished the town's golden era, after all. But that evening, as I walked toward the diner to pick up some coffee, I saw old Miller, the barber, no relation to the boy from the car. He was standing outside his shop. When he saw me, he didn't say a word. He just took off his cap and held it against his chest, giving me a slow, respectful nod. Then I saw the sheriff's deputy across the street do the same. They weren't honoring a hero. They were honoring a man who finally told the truth. I went back to my cabin on the edge of the woods. The black XUs were gone. The phones had stopped ringing. I found Martha in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower beds. She looked up and saw me standing there, and for a long minute, we just looked at each other. I told her about the badge and the pension. I told we might have to live a lot simpler from now on. Martha just stood up and wiped the dirt from her hands. She walked over and put her arms around my neck, leaning her head against my chest. "Jim," she whispered, "I didn't marry a badge, I married you. And I have never been more proud to be your wife than I am right now." We sat on the porch that night, watching the stars come out over the mountains. Sarah Vance stopped by later with a bottle of good bourbon. She told me the state was going to issue a posthumous pardon for the men in the car, and her grandfather's record was finally being cleared. Hank could finally rest, and so could she. We sat there in the quiet, 3 generations of people who had been scarred by the same lie, finally breathing the same clean air. Justice is a strange thing. Sometimes it doesn't look like a gavel or a jail cell. Sometimes it just looks like an old man being able to look at his own reflection in the morning without flinching. I lost my career, and I lost my standing in the town, but I found my soul again. And in the end, that is the only thing you get to take with you when the sun goes down for the last time. The truck is still in the driveway, and the engine still needs work. But there's no rush anymore. I have all the time in the world. I'm just an old man in Wyoming, living an honest life. And that is more than enough for me. If you believe that a man's honor is worth more than his badge, and that the truth is worth any price, then please subscribe for more stories like this one. It helps us keep telling the tales that matter. Until next time, take care of yourself, and keep your eyes on the road.